Yo, am I reacting to myself? Reacting to myself? Yo, what's going on? What's going on, travelers? My name is Zone Fanfic. Welcome back to Sing Zone. Yo, welcome back. I'm here with my brother, Booth God. What's going on, Booth God?
Greetings and salutations. Hello there, Zone.
Hey,
How
hey,
you been,
welcome.
brother?
What's going on, man? Oh, damn, dude. Yeah, I haven't talked to you. We haven't had you on the Sing Zone in how long now? It's been a while, right?
Yeah, it's been a while, at least officially. Yeah.
All right, so a little backstory here, y'all. Uh, yeah, so I essentially decided to do a little favor, do a little charity for some of the folks in my Discord. One of the folks in my Discord that's been, supporting, following for a while, and I am an anime enthusiast. I am an anime enthusiast, so um, just being able to talk about certain conversations in geek spaces. I thought this would be a good opportunity to invite another anime enthusiast over, and potential black anime enthusiast over, and talk about you know potential um, misconceptions, um, not only about things like anime and geek culture, but also um, the nature of like incel culture, right? And I don't know. I don't think it went as planned, but we're about to find out. Okay. Okay. So this is the first time on the new channel, on the new channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, brother. Yeah. So I know we shoot. We the last we spoke, we were talking about like, we were really heavy into like Boruto theories, Naruto theories, just anime, the anime pipeline, right? Is there anything you want to share about who Booth God is? Do you want to introduce us into Booth God? Give a little snippet. Yo, I realize like some of the dudes. Oh my gosh, a lot of the dudes in anime just have like zero social skills, extremely antisocial, and it's completely understandable why these same guys and men and women fall into these same bubbles of just like antisocial incel behavior. It's not just the men; it's the women as well, but it's mostly the men. The younger men.
I mean, yeah, I'm just honestly, to be fair, not really too much. I mean, I like talking about anime, like talking about video games. College student. Um, yeah, not too much going on, honestly. I mean, yeah, just about that. Those just about those things. I'll say, everyday
Okay.
casual, like
So, yeah, so he's humble. He's humble. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like,
Hey,
yeah.
hey, that's cool. That's cool. I like that. I think that there's a lot of people. So a little backstory, right? Essentially, I did this stream. At the time of recording this, it would be like maybe a day or two ago, right? And or maybe 24 hours. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I basically sent him like an agenda, and I was like, hey, are you comfortable with these? Right? Let me just talk to you directly, right? Hey, man, I sent you a list. I sent you a list of topics, and then I told you to get back to me if there were any concerns, if you wanted to adjust for any reason, or if there are any conversations that you weren't entirely comfortable with. Right? You mentioned you were good. You were eager to talk about certain things. That was your word, right? And upon further conversations, as we're about to find out, it looks like you weren't being entirely truthful. um, multiple times, right? And essentially, you lied to me, right? For me, it's straightforward. You lied to me, and that's just something that I don't appreciate. I don't do that to other people. I'm very transparent. If we're gonna be adults, we're there's no reason to lie, right? If you just wanted to have an opportunity to get on the platform, you could have did that. I would have been cool with that if you just would have been straightforward and honest with me, right? Um, so yeah, I guess that's what I'll say so far. Yeah. Especially in the anime community, could use a little bit of humbling, you know. This episode, it's not gonna be super crazy. I think we're just gonna have like, we're gonna talk about a few things here. But for the most part, we're just gonna sit back and we should have a conversation. Um, and if you travelers out there, you'd like to chime in and maybe comment on something, hopefully we could do some mutual exchange. And if you have any feedback or anything like that, if once this video releases, let us know. Let us know down below in the comment section, and hopefully we can answer those for you. All right,
Yeah, it'd be greatly appreciated, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in to listen and make sure.
bro. I don't need your commentary, dog. If you are a host on the platform, right, and we had that discussion, then yeah, maybe. I want to make it clear that this stream only remained live as long as it did because I wanted to hear your honest opinions, and hopefully break down some difficult truths, right? Misconceptions and reveal like bias, right? Um, not debate or be interrupted disrespectfully, as you will see. I believe you mentioned that you were 27, so you're Gen Z. You're Gen Z. So hopefully,
Like, comment, and subscribe.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. All right, all right, all right. Let me not getting too excited. A lot of the content, um, and it's something that I've grown to appreciate. And whether that's just anime or fiction. I would like to get into the DC conversations. I know they just released um, a comic that I want to.
Before it became popular, I guess that was a misconception, or anime is before it became.
I wanted to get into like maybe some it. I don't know. Should we talk about misconceptions about anime that
I mean,
you
yeah.
you may
I
be
mean,
aware of?
what's some misconceptions about anime? I think, well, maybe this is a misconception. I mean, a lot of things. I think people used to think that anime was weird for a very long period of time before it became popular. I guess
Mm.
that was a misconception, or it makes people think differently. Um, which obviously is a misconception because I mean, really, you think about it, it's just like regular cartoons. I mean, we all grew up watching cartoons or animated, like anything. Like we all grew up watch like type of shows like that. But obviously, with it's anime, it's Japanese. It's a little bit different. The tone is different. Their culture is obviously fundamentally different than ours, so they portray certain things, certain stories, narrative, characters completely different than how it would be over here in the West. So
Okay, so he's going off on a tangent here, right? Which could be read as a straw man. I think he just might have a little bit of autism or ADHD, right? As I probably would as well, right? You'd imagine. But in terms of what he was getting at, right? How there's certain insecurities within geek communities, right? It's the same pipeline how antisocial, autistic, or people with ADHD tend to flock into communities within geek culture, right? Whether that's music, right? Or niche communities within music or niche communities within anime, right? I'll throw manga in there as well or manhwa, right? Whatever you read. Um, or what else is there? And there's a number of things, right? But these same there's a certain inherent insecurity, right? Of people feeling like, especially black teens or kids, falling into the same rope a dope, right? As in terms of in terms of being told that you're white or something like that, right? Or you're too white, or you're an Oreo, right? I've heard some of those things myself, right? But um and generally in those cases, they come from other kids, right? And so that's generally these people, they do not grow, they don't basically get past that dilemma, right? That inherent insecurity of feeling like they're not black, right? Or they're too white, right? Even though anime is not an inherently white thing. That's just something that um Americans did, right? And white Americans did to sort of outcast anyone that wasn't coherent, adhering to their social standards, right? And in a form that is white supremacy, right? But my problem here was that a lot of people do not see that this is also white supremacy, right? But they do and they don't, right? And that's part of the problem.
I mean, I think a lot of times growing up, a lot of people thought that anime was weird and that it was kind of like lame and corny. I wouldn't necessarily call those misconceptions. Those are more just opinions, if anything.
Anime, depends what you mean, right? Anime can be weird, right? Anime can be corny, right? All those things can be true and not true at the same time. Two things can be true at the same time, right? Yeah, like look at hentai, right? That shit is weird and freaking corny, right? Look at freaking every isekai, right? Shit is weird and corny, right? For the most part, doesn't make it not cool, right? In some fashion, right? Until it gets weirder, right? There's a lot of Japanese people are just weird people, right?
I haven't really had any like crazy misconceptions, at least to my knowledge, unless you have any that you want to discuss. I think just the biggest one that people just thought it was weird.
Well, why would those be misconceptions? Can
Right.
you dive into
Sorry,
that a little bit? Why would those be
say that again.
misconceptions? Why would those be misconceptions? Can you dive into that a little bit? Why people would
Oh, okay.
consider those lame or weird, or you know?
I just think it was because that is a weird one. Honestly, I think it just comes down to the societal norms and anime. Obviously, at the time or early on in the early, if you know, I always say this like the dark ages
Misconceptions and norms are not the same thing, right?
of like the internet and just growing up. Obviously, the early 2000s and stuff like that. You know, if you're
Yeah.
around and you're growing up in that era, obviously, like anime. People when they looked at anime, they thought like, oh, it's weird because like it's different, and people usually
Mhm.
fear the unknown. They fear what they don't
That's how I see. I could tell you're dating yourself right now. All right, you grew up in the early 2000s. You felt it was weird, right? Anime has existed since the 70s, bro. Like, what are we talking about? You know what I mean?
understand, or you know what I'm saying. That's just humans in general. That's kind of who we are. So they tend to like shun things that are not of the norms in their particular community or environment or their upbringing. But for me, I had always grew up like watching like anime. Like I remember I first started watching Dragon Ball like with my like family, like my cousins and stuff like that, and that's how I kind of got into like Dragon Ball. I was like, oh, okay, and then I kind of stumbled upon to like Naruto and all of this stuff. So
The
when you
gateway,
watch these things, yeah, it's just like it's like the gateway. So, but like obviously, like another thing is when you
gateway
go to
anime.
school and when you go to school and with people, you meet friends, and then oh, they also like anime and stuff like that. It's like yada yada yada, and then y'all become cool. And y'all talk anime and stuff like that. Y'all watching it weekly and stuff like that. Obviously, shout out to Toonami every Saturday night. They was always
Yeah.
keeping us entertained. But then you get into that stigma that you can't really talk about it because it's kind of not seen as like cool or popular. So that's why I feel like people shunned it.
So he's essentially getting to the topic of anime becoming mainstream, right? Anime has been mainstream since freaking, I don't know, early 2000s, right? So the fact that he's saying that it wasn't mainstream is dumb, right? Dragon Ball was global, right?
Because it wasn't like the thing to talk about, like what would be normal. The normal is like, sports or hanging out with friends a lot or doing these such things or watching this particular thing.
Mhm.
So it was never really like
To societal norms,
obviously
right?
very young. And then obviously
The
like we're
patriarchy.
teenagers. Yeah, then obviously like we're like teenagers and kids and stuff like that. So we're not thinking about it long term. We're just thinking about it like, oh, this is weird because X, Y, and Z, but we can't really comprehend it. But it's not really that. It's just a thing where it's like people only tend to acknowledge when something is cool and different when it becomes popular. Like, and now in the
Mm.
case like where it's like anime is popular right now, right? And not even just like in the West, everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere around the world. You see people in the Olympics doing like iconic anime poses and stuff like that. You see
It's mainstream now, right? So anyway, yeah, it's mainstream. That doesn't mean that they don't like it, right?
like artists, celebrities, actors, actresses, influencers, politicians even
Mhm.
talking about anime in some way, some shape or form, even content creators. Obviously, that's not necessarily involved in the anime content community space. They still talk about it and stuff like that. Anime has become really popular rise now because why? You can make a lot of money off of it. And when something makes a lot of money, it's commodity. Commodity equals popularity.
What are you talking about, bro? You can capitalize off of it. Cool, we know that. You know what I mean? Oh shoot, what did I do?
Technically, in a certain sense,
And that's just not an anime thing alone. You can capitalize off of everything.
and when something becomes popular, it becomes a trend. When something becomes trend, the masses attract. It's like, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like that whole thing. So
You're not discovering anything new, brother. This is not a new phenomenon.
when you was when I at least when I was growing up, like it was kind of considered like unpopular and cool or like lame or weird because most people wasn't necessarily watching, or it was a case where most people was watching it, but they necessarily didn't speak on it because they didn't want to hide the fact that like, hey yo, if people know that I watch this, they may think I'm not cool or I'm not, you know what I'm saying? It's like peer pressure, like society conforming to societal norms.
Yeah, I get that. You know, it's not cool. I mean, this it wasn't always cool. I get what you're saying. It's it hasn't always been cool to like anime because it was considered niche, even though it was rising in popularity and started to become mainstream in the early 2000s. Right, it wasn't exactly considered cool, right? Just like I don't know if you play D&D, right? Or now people like it because of Stranger Things, right? Or if you shoot guns, right? Now people like it because of insert whatever movie right here, right? So I don't know, man. I don't know if it's holding up. I don't know what you're saying is that exactly holding up.
I was kind of like I was in a weird spot. I never really got bullied for like watching anime. I don't think I've ever had
That's a lie. That's a lie because you just said you got bullied.
that. But maybe people like may have laughed and stuff like that. But I never cared about people's opinions because I think early on, I kind of looked at those people like, oh, you're kind of thinking like, and obviously, like, again, we're kids. So it's like, I just saw things a little bit differently because I never wanted to be boxed in due to my community. And you know what I'm talking about when I community.
Mhm.
I mean, just being black and stuff like that. Because you got so many peer pressures and things when you're like black and you're coming up in a certain community and stuff like that. You get peer pressure, not from just the world, but like your own community itself. So it's like when you factor in all these things, like it can make anybody feel or like have anxiety about these type of things.
Okay, so you admit that you were feeling some type of way because you were bullied because of your opinions or what you liked. That's okay to admit. right? I think you're saying you didn't want to be put in this box, right? And that's cool, right? But trying to act like you weren't affected by what happens as a kid or while you were younger doesn't discount that these things don't exist.
things, but like for me, I kind of just like I am who I am, so I never really conformed to it because I knew at one point it was gonna be popular.
What does conforming to it mean? What does conforming to it mean? So say you say you're too white, right? Well, maybe this is something that he's gonna get up to later in the video to where maybe he'll come out and say I'm a white supremacist or something. I don't know, something crazy. I don't know.
And I was always correct. So it's like now that anime is popular, now you see your favorite artist that you listen to, or your favorite sports player or athlete, or etc. Now you see everybody reading and watching anime. So now I dislike it a lot because even the people who used to like hate on it is watching it now, and they're acting like they was there from the beginning, but you wasn't there. You really didn't like
Irrelevant.
it. You're only like it now because it's popular, and that's kind of one of the reasons.
That you can't know that for sure. You can't know that just because you cannot know that because someone's attention is now on something, they now like it. You just so happen to get into a niche, what was considered a niche community, and maybe start to find something you liked a little bit faster. But just because it's known now, just doesn't mean that someone will like it less,
Reasons
right?
why it's like I'm happy that
Mm.
the anime community or anime in general has gotten global, but like I dislike it because now you got the freeloaders, you got the grifters. I
Freeloaders, all right, and grifters, all right.
dislike anime grifter because you wasn't
Ooh.
really there. You know what I'm saying? Like
He about to break down crying. You wasn't there.
not just talking about like a content creator. I'm just talking about people in general, like everyday people who, the people who, oh, anime is weird, yada yada yada. But like you were one of those people, but now that it's popular.
Dang, I feel like this is a personal story. That's why I didn't want to like interrupt him right here because I was like, why does this feel so personal to him? You know what I mean? I asked the right question because it's not like this is like a specific personal story, right?
You're like
Not like a personal testimony.
you're only flocking because it's popular. So now you're trying to grift over here on this space like it's cool. And then obviously with the emergence of like the streaming like era and stuff like that, not just in music, but just streamers in general, you have people who cosplay and stuff like that. That's like their streaming like that's kind of like who their character is. They cosplay as all these big popular characters and stuff, which is like dope, of course.
Let's take pause for a
But now
second.
it's yeah.
Uh, yeah, like this tangent stuff is man. And yeah, it sounds like through the vacuum of growing up as watching anime and being a part of certain niche communities. um I recall there being a time, especially during the 90s, where there were anime was niche. In the 80s and 90s, anime was niche, and it was a small, small bubble, small communities within minority and black communities where they, you enjoyed anime, and those people were deemed nerds or weebs or geeks. Or I think first off, there is, and there's sort is not only a misconception, but it's termed wrong. I saw someone the other day on YouTube try to give away their black card. I was like, bro, what? Request denied. Because what the fuck are you talking about, bro? Just because people make fun of you for not being, quote, black enough, obviously those people are dumb, right? Because if you're black, you're black. That's how I know it's an insecurity, right? Because if you're comfortable in your own skin, if you're an adult, you'll know those are only superficial comments, right? They don't define who you are, right? What you like doesn't define what or who you are. Or it may define what, but it doesn't define who you are, right? Necessarily, right? And that's how I know, like, this is a lot of this stuff is projection, but I digress. Right. So a weeb is just someone who or a geek, right? Same thing. Is essentially someone who's extremely into um like anime, right? Or a particular thing, right? Is a nerd about a particular subject, right? And a nerd would imply that someone is smart, right? And generally speaking, right? Not just in a niche thing. So with that being said, it did sound like you were talking about maybe certain insecurities that may have arisen um, from within those communities when it pertains to anime, um, and maybe not being so prominent in 2026. How are your what are your thoughts when it pertains to that? Right, you spoke about
Okay,
insecurities,
I got you.
or maybe something along the lines of
Hmm.
it being niche and being, people being
Hmm.
potentially um, bullied for it being niche, and now
Yeah,
now that has sort of changed in 2026, we have things like
absolutely.
grifters, right? Or what
Hmm.
you're saying, they're grifters or people that are becoming more
Hmm.
more. I don't want to use the word. I'm quoting the word grifters, right? But
Hmm.
um, people that are becoming more interested in anime, right? Um,
Yeah, I mean,
but well, how
yeah.
where do you think that change has come from, and how do you think we got
What?
here?
Honestly, I just think well, if we're just talking about like the change of people, like specifically kind of opening up and accepting anime. I mean, obviously that just comes from like popularity. I mean, obviously, like it got really big and stuff like that. And when
Mhm.
when something tends to get big, right? You see like it's like you see people attracting to it. It's like when anime become big, oh okay, now it's out there in the open. It's kind of like it's kind of like having a secret, but it's like not like detrimental. It's like, oh, like this is my secret. I kind of like doing this like particular thing that
Bro, you're not talking about anything right now. You're just talking about something that you consider niche, but is no longer niche, being a victim of trends, right? You can't control everywhere. That's a bit narcissistic, brother. I'm just gonna have to say that. I mean, you can't control every aspect of life. You just can't, right? Anime hasn't been niche in over 20 years, right? Sorry, you grew up a Gen Z, and you didn't you weren't there when things were still becoming mainstream, right?
maybe other people don't do because it may be seen as odd. But then when that odd thing that you do becomes popular, so not everybody's doing it. So it's not really a secret no more. It's actually kind of like popular and not literal. That's kind of how I kind of relate to like what anime has become now. It used to be like the like thing that was very like super niche and super like only a select few people will watch in the I bet we can give you a pass. But then when you talk about anything, you talk about One Piece or Naruto.
Vanished,
Yeah.
and I think that's an interesting topic to land on. In terms of
That because like white has nothing to do with like anime because anime isn't white at all. It's actually Japanese. So it's like, but like it's ignorance.
right.
Like people don't really when you correct people and then they're like obviously like people don't know it.
So we're gonna talk about whether or not the insecurities of the grifters
Yeah.
vanished, and I think that's an interesting topic to land on. In terms of like the internet, is it possible that these maybe some of these people that, or maybe these apparent insecurities that maybe you heard about, you're white if you watch anime, growing up, or you're a
Yeah.
nerd, you're a nerd if you're into manga or anime growing up. Is it
Mm.
possible that maybe some of this went away because it was seen as bullying, and maybe the online space was growing with the internet? just
Hmm.
expanded? Is that possible? That because the internet expanded, maybe
Oh
some
yeah,
of these
absolutely.
maybe transmuted,
Oh,
transformed in.
absolutely. It's kind of funny because now I say the internet holds the most power over people in real life situations because it's funny it's kind of like a gift and a curse because like with the internet, right?
It's not yours. It's not yours. Anime is not yours. You cannot control every facet of life. This is an issue with a lot of underdeveloped adults and teenagers. They just think they can control the world, right? And a lot of them also have a lot of similarities with a lot of red pill and black pill communities, because they very much are the same type of people, right? Narcissistic, autistic, ADHD, right? Outcasts, right? That don't never get the mental health that they need, right?
The internet is a powerful tool for people who probably had a lot of social anxiety, very much introverted people and stuff
As I just said.
like that. I'll say not everybody, obviously, but like it was a tool and a device where people actually felt that they had power, and some people used it.
Am I am I prophetic? No, I'm just kidding. I watched this before, but my point still stands. A lot of people get into these communities because they feel like it's a safe zone, right? They feel like it's a place where they can go and, just be them with unchecked boundaries, right? And now that it's mainstream, it's difficult to hide your mental health, right? It's difficult to communicate, as if things are unchecked in your life, right? When you have severe mental health or severe trauma or, PTSD or freaking uh autism, right? If you're on a spectrum or if you've got ADHD or ADD, right? Or if you've got depression, anxiety, right? All these things fall under the same umbrella of individuals that fall into these same type of circles, right? Within geek culture,
For good,
right?
some people not so much. But yeah, I would say, yeah, definitely the expansion of the internet because they made it socially cool. And now it's funny because like the people who try to act really cool or like too cool are the ones who often get embarrassed by people on the internet because I say that I tell people this a lot. Like the internet holds a lot of power over people in real life. Obviously, it doesn't in real life, but it will make the perception of it and the weight of it because of how you are viewed on social media will definitely make you feel like you have a big impact or you like your life has been impacted. But that's just the
This is coming from someone that has zero social media presence, right? So I don't know. I feel like he's speaking out his ass right here. It may carry some truth, but ultimately, I think he's speaking out his ass. But it is important that we understand people like Booth God and understand this is not a personal attack. This video is not a personal attack on Booth God. This is merely my thoughts and constructive criticism on some of the things that were done in this video that I didn't approve of, and also the critiques on the topics that we discussed within this video. Right? Nothing more, nothing less. I'm not aiming for you. If I wanted to destroy you, I very well could.
and then having all these people like you would call the nerds or the geeks or the dweebs like running the internet. It's not really necessarily the people who like are deemed cool or socially acceptable. It's more so the nerds and the weebs and the geeks and whatever whatnot who kind of control the internet narrative, not just in the anime space and but in a lot of spaces.
That's very important to note. That's something he acknowledged. It's very much these individuals that control these spaces, right? The purists. And I think that was the word that rolled off, I think was should have rolled out the tongue. But I think that was definitely where he was getting at. So you're saying that they're the ones that try to control their own domain,
Yeah, I
essentially,
mean, yeah, in a
where
certain sense. I mean, well, I feel like they got the power to fight back against.
and I misworded that. It's not their own domain, right? Because they're also guests in that domain, right? Anime isn't, or gaming isn't, or music isn't, or any niche thing isn't one individual or a group's um uh thing, right? Anyone can have opinions on it if they're, if they're experienced, their knowledge on the subject.
uh
You're referring to purists.
certain narratives, certain particular narratives of whatever it is that they're specifically talking about. It doesn't have to be one specific niche, or it can be anything. But I'm just saying in general that the internet hold a lot of power for people who you would call, like, the geeks, the nerds, the dweebs, who not didn't really have that many friends,
The geeks.
so have like probably a lot of social anxiety. You know what I'm saying? Introverted. But when you have the internet, it's completely different because now you have this lot of power, especially if you gain a lot of influence. When you would influence, it's a law of attraction, all these type of things. It's like it's different now. So now you have this power. Now you command something that's completely.
I wouldn't even say they have power, right? The power is all psychological. They don't have any power, right? Internet, it doesn't mean anything. They don't have any power, no tangible power. They can't go and unplug your internet or stop you from viewing something. What they have is uh, presence, right? They don't have power, right?
Bigger than anything, bigger than the narrative. It's different when you can control the narrative with your influence.
So it's a sense of dominance or superiority that you think fuels their content or their approach. What do you say?
Yeah, I would say yeah. I mean, in a certain sense, I won't say everybody because
Mm.
again, everyone's different. But I would say more or less, yeah, it's likely to, with the more influence you have, the more likely you kind of, most
And
people have that, like,
who are these
I don't
nerds?
say
Who are these geeks that you know are fueled by this supremacist um, approach? Is it black or brown or white?
hmm.
What would you say? Who is the target demographic for these incels?
Honestly, I want to say it's a mix of both, but I feel like it's
Mix of both what?
more white people.
A mix of both what?
Like when we're talking about, like, if we're talking about just like who is it? Is it black people? Is it white people? Is it Hispanics? Like if we're talking about who
Is
are
it
like
is it
controlling, like,
Japanese?
yeah,
Could it be
like,
Japanese people? Well,
I mean, yeah, I'm just saying, like, I can't say specifically.
there was a lot, and there still is a lot of Japanese. That's been pretty much a thing since anime has existed. Is since the nukes hit Japan. Japan has had a secret anti-American campaign, right? Even though the American Empire has ran most of the world, you know, Japan can't hide from the capitalistic market, right? So they have to be able to produce to Americans, right? But they still have been able to find ways to gatekeep, and even in Japan, if you've ever been to Japan, they're extremely prejudiced, right? So yeah,
Who it is, because I don't really know, because it's kind of hard to like pinpoint or track down.
and I want to even say that for all Japanese, not all Japanese people. Obviously, I have um there are a lot of anime creators, manga creators, um producers, animators that um have excellent black African American representation within the anime community, right? And they work with hip hop artists, right? From Lupe Fiasco um, to Most Def, right? To MF Doom, right? All these people, all these rappers are synonymous within they helped revolutionize the anime space, and they're not recognized, right?
But I
Based
would
off of
say
your
it's
observation, based off of your observations, what have you seen?
just from social media, just from the social media influence.
I mean, the internet. We got
The
everybody got the
internet.
same. Everyone's got the same internet.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's honestly, in my opinion, it's more. I want to say more white people,
More white people.
but
Okay.
well, at least from what my experience of what I've seen. Now, again, that's my experience. I can be completely wrong.
I don't know why. Why are people so afraid to just say what they want? Right? Say what you got on your chest. Right? He's like trying to hide the fact that it's majority of white people that try to gatekeep this shit, even though it's not white culture. Right? It's Japanese culture. So
It'd be, but I'm not
he's like reluctant to freaking say that.
saying
Well,
that it's just
it's
them. They,
your experience. You're black, aren't you? Like, aren't you black? Or are you afraid to lose like maybe some of your white friends? Because if they can't handle the truth, if they can't have conversations like these where they understand that there's nuance in a lot of these conversations, then they need to go and check on their life. That's their issue, not your issue, right? You shouldn't have to conform to you. You're doing exactly what you said that you didn't want to do. You're conforming to their opinion on things. That's you don't have to do that, right? Experience is going to be your experience. It's going to be subjective to your
yeah, you know what I'm
reality,
saying.
right?
Like I'm saying,
So
what
it
I've
doesn't
seen.
mean that you're wrong. It just means it's your subjective opinion,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Or right or
exactly.
wrong.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I will say, like, I have seen, like,
Right, like I said, it doesn't have to be considered um an um objectively right or wrong, right? Life isn't entirely objectively right or wrong. All right, as we know, there are three sides to every story, right? We also know that there are multiple truths, right? Is what that comes down to, right? Meaning you have your story, someone else has their story, and there's another story, right? The truth, right? But then if we're considering multiple truths, right, let's figure out where the objectivity lies within those truths, right?
it, I have seen that. Yeah, it could. There are a few people in my community or my environment or people who look like me who are also a part of that narrative too. But from what I've seen mostly, and I try not to be on social media too much because I mean, again, that's brain rotting.
Smart.
Um, yeah, it's them too. But I would say it's mostly a
It's
lot
who
of
to? Can you be specific? Who are we talking
like a
about?
specific, like a specific person. I don't have a specific person
No.
because
You
I
said
can't.
it's them
Oh,
too.
I said like, well, I was saying it was like a majority of white people from what I've seen
So the
who
majority of white people.
can,
Okay.
yeah, that who I've seen like controlling the narratives. Not obviously again, not in just like in one particular topic or like one particular genre, like anime. Or it just seems like they have the most influence of the most narratives in general when it comes to like having a narrative or having like this amount of things or these amount of type of takes or this certain statements or I've seen it from mostly them, but that's just from my point of view. But not to say I haven't seen it from other people because I have. It's just it's more from them that I've seen.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
calling anybody of a particular group or ethnic race or background or whatever, just flat out calling them racial slurs doesn't really necessarily offend a majority because it's kind of like people perceive that differently on the internet, online. Most people won't take you seriously. People think you're rage baiting. People may think you're trolling. People may not even care about you.
Well, I don't understand what you're saying here. What are you trying to say? Hold on.
You know what I'm saying? But you
I'm
know,
curious.
but you're smart enough, but you're smart enough and you're self-aware enough to know what that actually like, kind of the conclusion that that leads to, obviously. But
So
obviously, you don't speak it.
not always blatant racism or stereotyping. No.
Because I can't.
You said it's approach. Is it black or brown or? Wide.
Hmm.
What would you say? Who is the target demographic?
Just it's more from them that I've seen. You know what I'm saying? But
I'm curious.
but you're smart enough, and you're self-aware enough to know what that actually like, kind of the conclusion that that leads to, obviously. But
So
obviously, you don't speak it.
not always blatant racism or stereotyping, which is
Yeah,
under racism. It's a subcategory, but um,
yeah,
you see it as like undertones. And so he's essentially talking about like how there is like low key racism, right? Not like blatant racism, in the sense that where people are intentionally trying to affect your mentality. I don't even know if I would go that far. I guess kids nowadays just call it trolling, right? Which is essentially just trying to get a reaction out of you, right? And so if they understood history, that's how I know like a lot of these people are kids because they have no concept of history, right? They have limited knowledge when it pertains to history, limited knowledge when it pertains to what um you know of racism and the effects of racism and long term sustained effects of racism throughout the inception of the American Empire within America. So yeah, less blatantly.
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
blatant racism just it doesn't really. Well, in my personal
He's gonna say that blatant racism doesn't really affect you in person or really affect you online, which is extremely subjective. You don't know how anyone's gonna react, right? You can't make a generalization like that. Comparing saying that one word or rather just being racist rather is is going to affect everyone the same way. You can't do a sweeping generalization like that.
indirect racism has more of an effect on people than just straight out racism
Uh, not true. Not true. Racism is racism. First off.
online.
Okay, can you dive into that?
And when I say that is because like calling anybody of a particular group or ethnic race or background or whatever, just flat out calling them racial slurs doesn't really necessarily offend a majority because it's kind
You don't know that. You're not everybody. What is up with this this virus parasitic fucking mind worm that has affected all freaking youth, black youth. They're not even opposed to racism anymore.
of
What
like
is this?
people perceive that differently on the internet, online. Most people won't take you seriously. People think you're rage baiting. People may think you're trolling. People might not even care about you. But when you're having certain what you call it, I say false pseudo intellectual
That's a
conversations when you're not really saying anything, but you're just trying to be a contrarian for the sake of opposing another one somebody's point, then you kind of come with these type of undertones of I'm not racist directly, but I'm racist indirectly. But obviously, if you're
so I get what he's saying here.
self-aware and you're very versed in having a conversation, you could pick up these things and be like, oh, and kind of lead to
But if this was your point from the beginning, you should have just said that. I understand not everyone's the best communicator, and that's why we're doing a breakdown today. Because there's not only was there potentially some miscommunication, but I was trying my best to not bait him, all right, not take the bait approach as I, stated prior, and the post that I posted prior when I ended the stream. But um the approach was not to just deconstruct what he was saying. My approach was to give him a voice, right, so that he could vocalize some of the concerns that he is obviously concerned about. right? And it seems like he may still be a victim of a lot of these things that he is not acknowledging as long-term effects.
To the conclusion. Now you might not say it off the top because again, like you have to find like you have to have evidence for everything. But sometimes most things don't require evidence. It's just about being self-aware and stuff
What the fuck does that even mean? Oh my gosh, this is what I get. This is what I get for letting dumbass come on my podcast.
like that. But again, like that all boils down to just
I mean, he's obviously young, but I mean, come on, man. We got it. It makes 100% sense now why America's reading level is at a fourth grade average. Like, I completely understand now why. Because a lot of these kids are just fucking failing out of school. How are they passing these kids? Dog. Like, what?
who you're interacting with.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, you're saying that this is something that, in my experience, well, let me start off like this. In my
Yeah.
experience, it's just not something that I encounter when it pertains to like interactions, but it's something that I encounter when it pertains to just the complete anime or geek culture diaspora, right?
Gotcha.
And I don't know if you've experienced the same thing when it pertains to other mediums like gaming or uh, comedy or music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, as well as anime, where there's also these you call them false pseudo intellectuals. I think you said. Well, it's kind of a double negative. You could say it's
Yeah.
pseudo. It is a double negative. You need to learn how to speak English, my brother. Intellectualism through a medium of like what was it? Uh it's a double negative in the context that you're using it, right? Through a medium of like contrarianism.
Oh
I could
yeah. It's
definitely
just like
see how they pretend to be like false contrarians.
yeah.
That is something that is definitely um very, very, very loud, right? How they try to
Yeah.
pretend to be,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're trying to be subtle, there's also that level of racism that um they it's closeted racism. Just because it's subtle doesn't make it less racist. Dumbass. Invoke, right? And it's not always, I think, something that I think a lot of folks in particular. Now, whether or not you want to talk about whether or not it's intentional or unintentional, those are things that can be argued. But that wasn't what was argued here. They feel like it's difficult to abstract or discuss. Is the concept of racism. I like to refer those white folks to people like Think Peace Tribe and FD Signifier because they actually have like full on how is that funny? Content that explores those concepts and explains those in an articulate, intellectual way, and
Mm-hmm.
breaks those down. I don't have that on the platform as of yet, but it's out there. Like it's definitely out there for them. So for these people that are that pretend to be are just contrarian, and trying to portray yeah, being a contrarian is just a facade, right? They're trying to appear to be critical thinkers or constructive critical thinkers, and they're not, right? So they come off contrarian, or they become contrarian, right? To voice their biased opinions without the constructive part, right? It's a facade level of intellectualism when it's just pseudo intellectualism, right? And trying to have yeah, it's very pseudo intellectual. Uh, Trying to have that edgy what was the word you called it? Edgy. These are low IQ individuals, guys. Guys, I need you to think. Black folks, I need you to think. Minorities, I need you to think. These are low individuals, IQ individuals, right? They they believe what they're doing is wise and smart, right? But they don't get past. They get to a threshold, and they can't think past that, right? right? Because they don't commit, right? They don't live the life that a lot of minorities and black folks, and they understand that, right? They understand that they're in a lot of ways. And I'm not trying to come off. I'm not trying to um, put like a sweeping generalization here, right? But generally, these individuals, not saying all white folks, right? I'm saying these individuals that do this thing are low IQ in this pursuit approach to where it's like trolling. Right?
Yeah, it's like
I'm
like
new to a lot of
trolling,
these
rage baiting. Yeah,
rage
trolling,
baiting.
rage
Right?
baiting, and stuff like that. Or just
I'm new to a lot of these Gen Z terms, so forgive me
yeah, I
if I'm
mean,
yeah, just because they're rage baiting, someone could be rage baiting to freaking distract you, right? Or someone could be rage baiting because they genuinely don't like you and they're just freaking bitches, right? And they don't want to appear to not like you, so they just rage bait you to get you to think about something else and to distract you from that's narcissistic, right? A lot of these rage baiting, trolling, they're narcissistic people, right? Healthy individuals do not think like this, right? And so that's why that's where that separation is, right? Healthy individuals versus unhealthy individuals. These individuals, right, that control these spaces are not healthy individuals, right?
no, you
Catching up
good
on.
because honestly, I, honestly, I don't use them as much, but because they're so prevalent in this time, obviously, because I mean, I'm technically a part of Gen Z in a sense, but like obviously, like I would say Gen Z kind of started a little bit later down the line.
That's what I was just saying earlier in the video.
And like honestly,
You're Gen Z, and obviously you started later, but all your projections are based on things that have already been happening, right? This isn't new to you or specific to you,
just
right?
because of so many different terms, not to get off topic, but yeah,
Do
like
you think
just the
this
rage
is
baiting.
do you think this is an issue that is primarily an issue within Gen Z, or is it like a is it also would you say it's also with millennials as well?
In terms of what?
Or later when it pertains to um this toxicity in like geek culture, whether it's like anime or comedy,
Mhm.
gaming, music, you name it.
Definitely, I'm not gonna lie. Definitely started with Gen Z.
It's not true. Right. You got people. So all right. Yeah, at this point it's 100% clear because in the 80s and 90s people were being called Oreo and freaking, too white for watching this. Right. As I know a lot of these things at your age, anime was already mainstream. So if you got any type of a lot of your things that you're projecting as things that happen to you found a way to make it seem personal, but I guarantee you probably listen to like some other YouTuber line. As you said, right? It became vocalized. Other YouTubers, this is my thought, right? Other YouTubers vocalized their story and you projected that onto yourself, right? Their story became your story. So even though you didn't grow up during the times where people were obviously very um critical of black geeks in these spaces and they made fun of them, you still found a way to try to be a part of that. Even though you're even if you are 27, I'm 27 is giving you the benefit of the doubt. I don't even think you're 27. I think you're probably like 20, 23, 22, 23. Maybe 24. I give you 24. But dog, it's clear that something in your brain hasn't fully developed yet. Like there's definitely some level of immaturity there.
I'm being completely honest.
You think it started with Gen Z, not
First, abs.
millennial? Is
No,
it
I mean, not saying that millennials couldn't have had like their hand in it, but even if we, let's say, if we do like go into it, yes, so you have to think about it. When was the millennial like? When was the millennial era? So you got to date back when the time where millennials started and when they ended. So you have to
Mhm.
think about it. Gaming culture didn't really boom until like what the 2010s, the mid 2010s.
What the fuck is he talking about, dog?
So that's right around the
No.
time that
No, gaming
well
culture, anime,
well
all these cultures, they've been boomed, especially in America. Is this is this a Zoomer? Is this what they is this guy a Zoomer? Oh, dog. It makes sense now. It makes sense now. These are Zoomers. America. Like America made
well
a lot of
well
these
no, no,
cultures
but I'm talking about like
up. Cause a lot of the things that he's talking about, he didn't even grow up in, right? I'm thinking he's 20. He said he's 27. Again, I'm thinking he's 24, 23, 24, based off of what I know.
no for sure, but no of course I agree with you, but I'm saying like in terms of like the biggest like of the popularity. So I would say like anywhere from like the earlier 2010s to like mid to late 2010s is like obviously most people would call it like peak in terms of gaming, anything
Mm.
like game culture and stuff like that, because they're
Wrong.
like that.
Mhm.
And it's
And
fine.
it looks, I would say it's in between millennials and Gen X, right?
Okay, okay.
That's what I would say. But I definitely can see where you say that, you know, Gen Z, maybe now, maybe today, or maybe the last few years, as in 5 to 10 years, Gen Z has had a big part in a lot of um, toxicity in the culture. Yeah, they're growing up. Gen Z they're all adults now for the most part. You know, I think the youngest Gen Z is like 18 or 19. So yeah, it makes sense that they're getting into these mainstream places. They're trying to make their money. I understand where the grifter claims come from because you know, it's something to be capitalized on now, and that's cool. All right, you can make money off of it. I could definitely see
For
that within certain, and that doesn't take away from the fact that, you know, they're still a part of the anime community, right? Red pillar,
sure.
younger red
Yeah.
pillars and black pillars, like
Well, the only well, not to cut you off, obviously, like I do agree with your point. I'm not saying
I like that you did that. I like that you acknowledge that you didn't want to cut me off and still cut me off. Yeah, I'm gonna keep that in there.
that Gen Z are as a direct result of like being the most toxic, because obviously when you date back to like obviously like Xbox game chat days, like obviously like
Mm.
early 2010s, like 2011 stuff, like people were toxic on Xbox. If you know, you know. If you was in those game chats, people were saying the most outrageous things that couldn't be said in this.
Yes, yes, we know. And if you were involved in politics at all, or aware, had any level of situational awareness at all, you would know that in the Epstein files, 4chan was found to have been, you know, connected with Pizzagate and Epstein and Call of Duty and Xbox. And Call it, you know, so that in it all connects, brother. It all connects. All right, these red pill guys are, and Bitcoin guys, anime guys, they all fell under the same fucking Epstein bubble, right?
Generation, obviously. So obviously I was there. I was just saying that I don't think that is as worse as what we are
And what I mean by that is they were victims of, they were targeted by Epstein. Yes.
now. I just think that that was a more of like you could call that worse, and like yes, for that time you would say, oh yeah, that's absolutely terrible. But like I would say now it took on a whole shape, a new identity as itself, like the red pill space or the overly toxic.
That's not a new identity. It's a way to define it, right? A new way to define it, right? Black pill are just the extreme versions of red pill guys, right? And if we're being honest, the red pill guys aren't even really red pill. They're just gay. All right.
Even as a you say a Gen Z person, even I didn't really consider myself that.
No, dog. You're Gen Z. You're almost Gen Alpha. I would definitely say that, yeah, technology over the last 20 years,
Mm,
20, 25, 30 years has
for sure.
evolved drastically,
For sure.
at a rapid pace. But in terms of like technology as a whole, a lot of the technology has already been built in and has been built in since like the 50s, the
Yeah.
1950s, right? But the thing is, it didn't really gain traction or um, it become commercial
Success.
until yeah, become a commercial success until like the 90s and early
Hmm.
2000s. So yeah, I could see where um you're seeing that a lot of people that were extremely influenced by like technology, and anime and all these pop culture hits, right? But then you could also see how maybe anime contributed to a lot of that because a lot of the stuff existed before the internet boom, right?
Yeah, for
Or
sure.
you got like anime, all this, you got music, it didn't become until the
Still very new. It was still very new to like the internet, like the evolution of phones and technology evolving. That's why I say like Gen Z has been directly influenced by all that stuff. That's why that's why they're so like addicted to their phone and streamers and content creators and the internet and stuff like that. And honestly, like they're less about music nowadays from what I've seen online than they are about anything else. Like
yeah, I would
it's
say
that's why it's
I would definitely say that, yeah. That's not true. You're using your own bias, right, as objective truth, right? It's not how that works. Technology over the last 20 years,
mm,
20, 25, 30, or rather your own worldview as the objective truth, right? It's not how that works. Years has
for sure.
evolved drastically,
For sure.
at a rapid pace. But in terms of like technology as a whole, a lot of the technology has already been built in and has been built in since like the 50s, the
Yeah.
1950s, right? But
Thousands, obviously, people that know what everything is because you got to think about it. Mhm.
uh,
Most people who in your community who are hardcore, die-core fans are going to agree with a majority of things you say. There's not going to be too many people.
are you familiar with like Myron and
Yeah, I am quite acquainted with the Fresh and Fit dudes.
you sound almost excited. So you are familiar with them, all right?
I used to watch some of their stuff, believe
You try to freaking shrug it off as he don't really he's never really watched it. This is how I know like a lot of these dudes are fucking closeted gay people, man. And it's okay to be gay, right? It's okay to be anything you want, right? But come out the closet, dog.
not like earlier in the day before they got demonetized on like YouTube, I believe it was the platform that they was on originally. Because I used to watch some of their content, I used to think they were funny. I never necessarily was taking anything that they were saying as
And this is part of the problem, right? Is because this is how it becomes a lot of other older people that never grow out. It repeats the same cycle, right? Of young adults that never get the mental health that they need, grow up, and then also project those same beliefs into younger adults in the next generation, right? And so what happens is those kids then that are in the rising generations then grow up, also not dealing with their mental health, also going through the same issues, but they see similarities in guys like Myron, in guys like freaking I think Nico's a little bit younger, but in freaking Tate, right? The Tate brothers, right? And they see all this money and this wealth, but they disregard the fact that they got caught for trafficking people, right? Women, right? So they don't really care, right? It's more of a relief for them, I found, that they could confine in these older degenerates, these older incels, and see something that they can connect with, right? And they don't acknowledge that that's not healthy, right? That what they're seeing is not healthy. Now, is that any fault of their own? I'm going to say no. I'm going to also say that it's a fault of parents, right? It's a fault. Um, but yeah, of course, as they get older, there has to be some level of therapy, right? There is a phenomenon by I forget the doctor's name, but if I recall it, maybe I'll mention it in the conversation below. But it's essentially the double empathy theory, right? Or double empathy problem, right? Don't misconfuse this um for anything else, right? In quote, it is the double empathy problem, right? And it's a particular doctor that talks about how there is a issue between um uh two people seeking uh objective truths, their own objective truths instead of, basically speaking past each other. It's a side effect of autism. I believe he also talked about monotropism. So look into that. Maybe I'll do a separate video on it once I get a little bit more familiar on the topic itself. But based off of what I learned in my brief, I don't know, few minutes of sitting down with a theory and trying to understand it, it seems like a lot of this stuff is connected to our conversation, and I'm sure it's an ongoing, recurring thing within these geek spaces, right? Case high cases of autism and mental disorders, and low cases of therapy is generally what you'll find.
Serious, even though I think there was a lot of logic and evidence behind what they're saying. Yes, but approach was very aggressive and very uncouth behavior.
Well, uncoons? Is that a word? Uncoons. Is he trying to say uncoon? I cannot hear what he's trying to say. You said uncoon?
Yeah, like I just didn't like how they, like what they saying, what some of the things that they were talking about, like societal problems, problems in the government and stuff like that, or just in dating community, or just male toxic masculinity community. Like, yes, some of the things that they were saying were like, you could say, are correct, right? It's just I don't necessarily agree with their approach. Even not like earlier in the day before they got demonetized on like YouTube, I believe it was the platform that they was on originally. Because I used to watch some of their content, I used to think they were funny. I never necessarily was taking anything that they were saying as serious, even though I think there was a lot of logic and evidence behind what they're saying.
Okay, I'm glad he said logic, because the thing about logic, right, is it's not entirely truthful, right? There could be true logic and there can be false logic, right? So, or there can be undefined or null logic, right? So again, he's saying truthful. So in his words, I think he's saying that there was truthful. There are truths or things that sounded truthful when it pertains to logic in itself that came from the red pillars, right? So here's my thing, right? Because I'm as much as I advocate for mental health, right? I have to also acknowledge the fact that it goes both ways, right? Yes, it is majority of men that this um that tend to fall into these circles, right, of incelness, right? But you also have to acknowledge that there's also a lot of women as well, and those women also do a lot of the same things, right? They have high cases of anxiety, depression, right, neglect, right, um, autism, ADHD, ADD, right? It's the same thing, right? But generally, at least in recent history, it hasn't been as much, or throughout history, it hasn't been as much. But in modern times, today, yes, women are very well accepted into these spaces. Um, and yeah, they do a lot of the same stuff as well. And I'm very well much an advocate for healthy relationships between men and women, right? Um, I think that is it's good that you do have people talking about and communicating some of the difficulties when it turns to being in a relationship, sustaining a relationship, or even a marriage, right? I think that those things are vital, right, when it pertains to sustaining life, right? Now, yeah, those things could also occur within same-sex relationships, right, or trans relationships, and I'm sure they could be just as healthy, right? But we're in a time where it's very difficult to even have a societal norm, right? In fact, I would say societal norm is a thing that doesn't really exist anymore, right? There are things that, and I think that's the gray area that a lot of these individuals face is that, yeah, maybe religion isn't the best thing to look for when it pertains to your moral barometer, um, right? Or maybe your your grandfather, or your grandmother, or your religious parents aren't really the best people to look for when it pertains to trying to find norms that have been mistakenly repeated over the course of history, time and time again for hundreds of years. Maybe they aren't the best people to make the change, right? Maybe it's okay to have adult conversations with them and let them know they're going to do your own thing, right? Now, whether or not you'll get rejected or accepted by them, hit or miss, right? You can't always rely on the fact that um your parents are going to be your decision makers throughout life, right? You're going to outgrow them, you're going to move out of their house, right? And you're going to make your own decisions, right? Just because you're they have a particular mindset or opinion doesn't mean you have to confine your thoughts or opinions based off of theirs, right? And you don't have to do that from, I know there's a rule, obey your seniors, right? Respect your seniors, right? Well, your seniors fucked up sometimes, right? They're human, right? And that's okay to acknowledge, right? But also be the change you want to see, right? What was correct about some of the things that you saw that they were talking
I,
about?
well, particularly like in one thing I think if I remember, it was like dating culture, right? So it's like we're talking about like the standard of like how
See, these same individuals try to figure out how to date, and they end up going back into the same type of go. They end up going to the same exact people who made the exact mistakes that they're making right now. Right? They're repeating the exact same cycles, and they do not see that the people they're going to essentially never took care of their mental health. Right? They never they never focused on themselves. Right? And they became degenerates, right? Because of that, right? They secluded themselves. They never got checked to see if they had freaking any number of mental or mental behavioral symptoms, right? Or got diagnosed properly, right? So a lot of things are very common, right?
most women think like on social media, like women who are very beautiful and attractive and who has access to abundance of like connections to like wealthy guys and stuff like this. And like, oh, like, yo, you have to be like this, or you have to do these certain amount of things. And then it's like, okay, so it's like this. When you have an attractive person who's like, let's say attractive person, attractive woman, she's an 8 or 9, whatever. So yeah, when she gets introduced into a certain lifestyle, she's never going to downgrade herself. She's only going to continue to go up from there, right? So I agree with that because that makes sense logically because I've seen it happen in front of my eyes before.
And here's things that like look go. I don't know if you have a sister out there or an auntie out there. Go talk to them, brother, brother, brother. Understand your strengths and your weaknesses. As a man, you need to understand your strengths and your weaknesses, right? And your weakness seems to be that you are out of touch with women in general, right? Which means you have no you have no barometer, uh, nothing to gauge on how to treat women respectfully, right? How to have a mutual relationship, right? Where there is just respect both ways, right? And it shows here. And so those are some of the things that I've dated women in the past, right? I got a woman of my own. Just knowing that as you continue to date and to grow up, you find that a lot of these opinions are just blowing up misconceptions. Some of them, yeah, as they say, there's a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So there, of course, is going to be a little bit of truth in everything that they that is said, but a lot of stuff is just marketing, bro. And as soon as I think as soon as people pick that up, there are people, at least there are people picking it up now to where it's they can see it was just a grift, right? That they're just you taking advantage. And you stated that earlier, right? You stated that earlier. You said that Sneeko was essentially, you change platforms and they're, everyone's sort of shifting now, and yeah, they're just fucking grifters, dog. They're grifters, but the things in their characters still reflect. They can still be true, right? What they like can still be true, right? What they say about women can still reflect who they are, right? What they say about themselves can still reflect who they are, right? Of these of none of these guys are real dudes, right? They're performers or artists, and this is what they choose to market to the world. Imagine that. Imagine your brand being racism, right? Would you be considered a good person, right? Would you look at someone differently, or even sexism, right? Say it was a woman, right, that gained popularity specifically to tear men down, right? And no one could tell her anything because a lot of the things that she was saying were her truth, and they were truthful for a lot of women. But does that mean that it was objectively true? No. Does that mean that there could be some nuance in what she's saying that she may not be saying? Yes. Right. So in a lot of these outlets, you could tell that a lot of these people are narcissists. And what they tend to do is ignore nuance when it suits them personally. Men, young men and women that don't have their frontal lobes developed, right? Um, so I don't know. Have you seen those? Was there anything specifically that maybe and maybe not just inherently those individuals, right? What about
Hyper
in the anime community or gaming community?
hyper aggressive and overly combative. Um,
Word salad, brother. Word salad. Hyperly aggressive word salad.
what aware of that. I'm not obviously as active into those type of conversations or like like I don't follow as like heavy on like artist stuff like that as much as I used to.
Dog, you're a fucking liar. You talked about that subtle racism earlier, right? How they try to hide their racism under contrarianism, but it's pseudo intellectualism, right? Their approach is pseudo intellectual, right?
False. I said false. I said false pseudo intellectual
But
because you can sound smart to it.
that's a That's a double negative. It's just when you say false pseudo intellectual, what you're saying is that um they're fake intellectual, right? So either you're saying they're fake intellectual or they're a fake intellectual, which would mean that which would also imply that they're just an intellectual. So what is it? What is it for you? Are they an intellectual or are they a pseudo intellectual?
Well, I kind of describe it as like it's not that you're like dumb. I just
No, I didn't
I
say
just
that. I'm
no
asking
no
a
no no
question. I'm
I know
asking whether or
I
not
got you.
are they a pseudo intellectual or are they an intellectual? You said, but I'm going to need you to redefine what you mean by fake pseudo intellectual.
Oh, okay. So that's just a term that I came up with. Like,
Can't make this shit up. Can't make this shit up. Dog, you.
it's
But
not like
it's a
it's not a
double
real thing.
negative.
But
It can't exist, is what I'm saying.
yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
As of
It's
now,
just
would you
it's
say
like a
they
funny.
are in the context of what you're saying? It doesn't make sense. It's not just that it doesn't exist. It's that when you say fake pseudo intellectual, that's a double negative in the context that you're phrasing it, right? So you mean pseudo intellectual, right? Or an intellectual or a pseudo intellectual. It can only be one of the two. What would you say?
Neither.
But that's okay. Fucking dumbass. God damn, dude. This is the last time I'm doing this, dog. I'm sorry. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I went ahead and dropped the whole thing. For the most part, I know I'm kind of skipping through a little bit, but for the most part, you guys get the idea here. I'm trying to be able to give young folks, young minorities, the opportunity to speak their piece, and this is what they're coming up with, dog. They're shilling for white supremacists. Fucking crazy, dog.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if you've ever heard that term before, it's like you can like sell somebody something right with persuasion, obviously, because that's you. That's literally how most debates kind of work. It's about trying to persuade people. So, like, when you're like having a conversation,
It's I
and you
wouldn't I don't agree with that, but you
that's fine, that's fine, that's cool. But I would say, like, you know what I'm saying?
intellectual.
Well, I was just saying people were trying to pretend that they're like intelligent, but they're just saying a bunch of whole lot of nothing. And like when people catch on to that and they break it down and they expose that,
Okay, kind of like what I'm doing right now.
what do you have?
So pseudo intellectual. You mean they're
Is
pseudo
that what you?
intellectual? Yeah,
Is that what that? Okay, that does
yeah,
that
yeah.
fall under that term?
Yes. So a pseudo black pillars. A lot of these red
Impactful as they was, or not as?
any beliefs at all. Like, do we know that, or are they just selling?
I
Are they just
mean,
selling marketed to under? Yeah, I think all too often we think that these red pillars genuinely feel and black pillars genuinely feel like they believe what they want to what they're putting out, right? That they want to settle down, they want to have a woman, and they don't because what their actions I'm getting to is their actions don't convince otherwise, right? Their actions don't suggest that they're actually looking for a woman to settle down with. Their actions suggest that they want to be another Tate. They want to have a harem of women and they want, you know, their women to just say, yes, daddy, uh, and, have sex with them all the time. And if that's what you want, you don't want a regular traditional relationship. You want a harem, right? You want a bundle of women that will do what you say. That's not 1,000. That's not 12 wives, right? Dog, that's not a normal relationship. If that's what you want, say that's what you want. But then also don't also try to have a traditional relationship. right? And don't expect women to also comply and do what you want, right? Because they're people too. And they're developed. When you say, you remember when it was all in your face, maybe you were in a certain algorithm that people that clicked what you clicked, you're in the algorithm bubble, or you're in an algorithm bubble that pushed right NFTs, right? So
Dog,
I
I
think
was seeing it. Dog, I was seeing NFT commercials, brother.
right,
There were
all right.
NFT commercials. It was
Dog, you're in an algorithm. The algorithm is the internet. Dog, do I gotta break down what a fucking algorithm is at a technical level? I'll break it down at a technical level, dog. I'll break it down for you if you want me to. Let me know. All right, dog. I'm done. Yeah. If I haven't already posted the video of my thoughts on the Legend of Korra. All right, y'all. So we're gonna check out this Legend of Korra video real quick. I think it's a huge issue when we also have black creators talking about the Legend of Korra like it's not a completely different series. Yes, it's by the same creator. Um, yes, it's a part of the same series, but it's not the same series, right? The objective goal for the Legend of Korra was 100% different, right? Aang's goal, was vastly different. Yes, he did deal with some level of politics at his young age, but Korra's challenges were vastly different. And if you're actually a fan and not just trying to rope up to um this red pill, trend, right, where everyone's just hating on everything anti-woke and everything um black. Yeah, you have a black protagonist woman, right? Cool. I like it, right? I actually like it. And I think most people should like it. It's a good thing, it's a new thing. And I'm not saying that's gonna define the series, right? What defines the series are the challenges, what the creator actually tried to do, and then also what they managed to accomplish within the series, right? Again, these are fictional characters, and whether or not you hate a particular fictional character really says more about you than it does about the character itself, right? Again, these are written by the same creator. So,
Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then,
my thoughts.
okay, this is by a guy named
Hi, my name is
Empathy
Tim. I write for
Empathy Machine.
television.
This is by a guy named Empty Machines, right? And this guy, he does an excellent job at sort of painting what um, what the common misconceptions and narratives are around this series in particular. And yes, I'm referring to Legend of Korra in this example, but yeah, uh, this also pertains to things like Miles Morales or Static Shock, right? Or any number of people that people reviewers like just so happen to come off as contrarian. And I'm glad we had Booth God, here to explore, even though he didn't want to like dive into. I'm glad that he was able to admit it, right? Because being able to admit it is only the first step, right?
These are my thoughts. So today I want to talk about a narrative archetype. It's an old archetype, one of the oldest in storytelling. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a classic power fantasy. It tells the story of a young boy who is told one day that he is the special boy, and he alone must save the world. Then, over the course of 3 seasons, he becomes more and more powerful until he can face the evil king.
All right, well, that's not work.
Along the way, Aang stumbles into minor conflicts, each of which he solves with the help of his increasingly powerful friends. It ends with him fighting and beating the evil king. What does the king want? It doesn't really matter. This is Aang's story. What happens to a warlike, autocratic nation after you have forcefully removed their head of state? Don't worry about it. The day is saved because Aang has completed his growth. Now, simple isn't necessarily bad. For how basic the overarching narrative of The Last Airbender is, its episode-to-episode storytelling is superb. And the character arcs that develop over the course of the show are also really excellent. Being a straightforward power fantasy is not a bad idea for a kids show. Kids are usually pretty powerless, so they gravitate towards stories about young people gaining power and then using those powers for good. In general, power fantasies can provide a really important outlet for audiences of all ages. What the power fantasy does is it allows you to examine what you would do if you could change the world. And it gives you the opportunity to evaluate other people who do have tremendous power and whether or not they are doing enough to change the world themselves.
I agree with that.
But The Legend of Korra is doing something a lot more interesting. Korra is telling an anti-power fantasy. Unlike Aang, who is introduced as a reluctant hero, who would much rather be a normal boy than a world-saving messiah, Korra is introduced as having completely embraced.
Right. So they start from two different, like, if you know anything about like story writing, and that's why it all makes sense now. Like a lot of these newer anime fans approach on stories. These new anime fans are the same as Drake fans, is the same as these red pill dudes. They don't really care about the story. They just care about the beginning and the end, right? And whether or not the plot has a bang, right? They don't care about real storytelling, and that's unfortunate.
The role of Avatar before the show even begins. She wants the power. She wants the responsibility. The problem Korra faces is that the world is complicated, and the threats she faces cannot be solved through the power of shooting fire. Let's look at some examples. In Season 1, the villain Ammon is stoking civil unrest by highlighting the unjust imbalance between benders, people with magic, and non-benders. A class war is brewing, and when Korra is confronted by these revolutionaries, she reacts in the way she's been taught to, with violence. She is the Avatar, after all. She can defeat anyone. Of course, violence won't solve this problem. All the power in the world cannot resolve class conflict. Korra must stop Ammon's dastardly plan, but she cannot defeat Ammon by fighting him.
Yeah, their character development story plots are vastly different. And Korra actually has, if you look at the amount of episodes, Korra actually has less time to do a lot more. You know what I mean? So, and she has, so if you just factor that in, like, come on, are we really being fair to like Korra? I don't think we are.
She can only defeat him by understanding him and then exposing him, which she does. Here we see the beginnings of an anti-power fantasy. Korra has the power already, and she's eager to use it, but she cannot simply pummel her enemies into submission. She has to address the root causes for their dissatisfaction. Unlike in The Last Airbender, where the motivations of the villain did not matter, Korra has to actually listen to her enemies. She has to empathize with.
That's vastly different. That's vastly different. As to where, as a certain story point factor that isn't there for Avatar Last Airbender. That's how I know these people don't really care about the series.
With them.
They're just fucking liars.
And understand their worldview if she ever intends to resolve the conflict. And I think that it's this narrative arc that led to a lot of accusations of Korra being a Mary Sue. Well, this and sexism. So, Mary Sue is a term that originated in fan fiction and is used to describe someone who does not have any flaws, is good at everything, usually is an author insert, and is almost always a woman, because no one seems to mind if a man in a story has no flaws. Korra seems to fit the bill as a Mary Sue, especially compared to Aang. She starts out having learned 3 of the 4 elements, she's mastered skills that even Aang never could, but Korra is not a Mary Sue. She's wrong all the time, and she has flaws. But those flaws are not in her ability to fight. She starts out so effortlessly powerful because, unlike Aang, her arc is not about gaining the power to win a battle, but
Again, I'm loving the contrast because these people love to compare Aang and Korra. First off, even though there's a big age difference, Korra was still a child at the end of the series, or still a kid. 21 is still a kid, dog. Like, your frontal lobe is not fully developed. And come on, are we being for real here?
gaining the skills to prevent ever having to fight a battle in the first place. Of course, Korra doesn't figure this all out in Season 1. Much like with Aang, who took 3 seasons to come into his power, Korra takes 4 seasons to discover her power's limitations. At the start of Season 2, Korra's father is put on trial. Korra doesn't think this trial is fair, so she breaks him out of prison. I mean, she has the power, and if she can use it to save her father, why not use it? Of course, this doesn't go over well. Her father is now leading a rebellion. A civil war has begun, and the Avatar is the cause. People are rightly upset with her decision. I mean, sure, the Avatar has ended wars before, but should the Avatar be starting wars? Season 2 ends with Korra permanently opening a portal that allows magical spirits to enter our world and live among us. This is initially seen as a restoration of balance and harmony with the spirit world, but that story gets complicated down the line. See, Korra didn't ask if she could fundamentally change the fabric of reality. She didn't ask the president, she didn't run it by the people. She just did it. Why? Because she has the power. The merger of the spirit world and the physical is not a good or bad thing, it was a necessary thing, but it does have consequences. Maybe Korra can justify
Did you hear that? Necessary.
her decisions, but the thing about radically changing the world is that Korra is now responsible for every consequence of that change, good or bad. And this is
Yeah, that's a different level of leadership, guys. Like, yeah, Aang didn't really get his power, right? Didn't start tapping into his power until like the end of the series. Korra had it and had to learn how to utilize it to fit her current goals as a kid, basically, as a young adult, right? She was 17, 18. The series went from the time she was 17 to 21 years old. That's young as fuck. All right.
important part of the anti-power fantasy. When Korra uses her awesome powers to change the world, she cannot escape responsibility for the consequences of those changes. The most notable consequence of this is the villain of Season 3, Zahir. Zahir is a radical anarchist who believes that all unjust systems of authority need to be destroyed, and he has a pretty good point. We have seen throughout Korra and The Last Airbender how the imperial system has led to oppression and war, so Zahir decides to tear it all down. But he takes it one step further. He makes the case that the Avatar is a form of authoritarian control. She is an unelected individual who has the power to start civil wars, undermine the law, and completely warp the fabric of reality based on her whims. And once again, Korra cannot defeat Zahir without first reckoning with Zahir's point of view. She has to confront her own use of power and how it has affected the world. The Last Airbender introduced the idea that there is an Avatar state, a sort of secret weapon that the Avatar has in their back pocket. In this state, the Avatar can do even more crazy powerful things, but it's a risky move because if you die in this state, the whole Avatar line dies with you. This is a pretty classic narrative device when telling a power fantasy, a final form that allows you to do even more crazy things, but at a cost. But because Korra is an anti-power fantasy, Zahir plans to use the Avatar state against her. He wants to coax it out so that he can permanently end the oppression of the Avatar. Korra's most powerful tool is now a liability. And then, finally, Season 4, where the show completes Korra's arc. Here, we see Korra take a step back.
That's a different level of fighting, guys. Like, the enemy is aware of the side effects of the avatar state, the liability of the avatar state, and was able to try to use it against her. Right? That's a different ball game. Aang never faced anything like that. Her problems were vastly more extreme than 12-year-old Aang. All right.
Encounter with Zahir has left,
and technically, he's like 115 years old. So the ages aren't even comparable. He's like 100 years older than her. As a kid, even though you're frozen in ice, he was still able to be in the avatar state and grow and develop for that amount of years, right? And so if you're comparing 112-year-old years Aang to 17-year-old Korra, dog, she's vastly more superior in every way.
Left her shaken
and way smarter.
And traumatized, she decides to fully reject her role as the Avatar. She doesn't want the power. She gives up. This is such a smart direction to take a character who started out so powerful and eager to save the world. Of course, with Korra out,
that is big. She went from loving the power to not knowing what to do with it to having an ego death. I think that's solid character development so far.
Out of the picture, someone has to fill the power vacuum. Kuvira, the villain of Season 4, perfectly represents everything the show has to say about power. Kuvira saw the Avatar as a policeman for the world, so when the Avatar is no longer there, Kuvira decides to take up that mantle. She becomes an autocrat who establishes a massive, authoritarian police state that takes over much of the world. But unlike Fire Lord Ozai in The Last Airbender, her motivation is firmly established. Kuvira models her whole agenda on the Avatar. She builds a giant army and huge weapons of war that give her all the power, and she uses that power to create order at the barrel of a gun. She is the embodiment of the power fantasy, but presented as a villain. It's no accident that her name, Kuvira, sounds so much like Korra.
Right.
There was an old aphorism made famous by Martin Luther King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Essentially, things get better over time. This quote could be the guiding principle of The Last Airbender. In this show, there are a great many injustices in the world, and slowly but surely, Avatar Aang rights them. It's not always quick, and it's not always perfect, but the arc of the show bends towards justice. Of course, this aphorism, for all of its beauty, is a lie. If you took a random community in the year 400 and compared them to a similar community in the year 1400, you would find, most likely, no real improvement. No more equality, no more justice, no better standard of living. Now sure, if you looked at just the last 100 years, you'd see incredible improvement in most industrialized nations. But remember, history doesn't end now. The story of history goes on, and there is no guarantee that things will only ever get better.
That's true.
In 100 years, we might have less freedoms, less stability, lower standards of living.
That is a big, big dilemma. That is a big, big dilemma that just so happens to be lost in these contrarian talking points, right? It's like me freaking throwing a freaking, I don't know, crashing into someone and killing them, right? With my car, right? And then for that one individual, right, saying freaking 500 years from now, oh, the country is messed up because Zone crashed into freaking a car 500 years ago. And from that one single incident, everything started to fall in place. Maybe true, but where's the nuance, right? And can you actually make that conclusion based on that evidence, right? Based on 500 years, can you conclude that one thing was the cause, not multiple trickling things, but one thing? And I'm not talking about the catalyst. I know a lot of people like to say, is the catalyst is the catalyst that actually, that we're talking about. No, dog. No, 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 no. That's not how that works. Right? That's not how that works. One thing doesn't affect, you know, everything, right? Could be a big event, but a car crash isn't a big event, right?
We return to the institutions of slavery and discrimination that we look on with horror now. The legend of Korra does not look at the passage of time as a slow march towards justice. Instead, it portrays history as a pendulum, swinging from one extreme to another. Korra's opening of the spirit world leads to Zahir's radical anarchism, which leads to Kuvira's militant authoritarianism. Each swing in one direction creates the need for a counterswing. And for a show that constantly talks about balance, I think this kind of storytelling makes a lot of sense. There is no good and evil like in The Last Airbender. There is simply misguided and misguided.
Nuance, guys. So again, he's clarifying for me. He's clarifying. He's saying, dog, there's not always just good and bad. Sometimes there's nuance, right? Sometimes things have a little good and a little bad, right? Sometimes things aren't inherently good or inherently bad, right? I think that mindset is one of kids versus adults, right? Generally, adults can observe nuance, right, due to their frontal lobe, right? But kids, they'll ignore that because they live in a world where it's just good and bad, right? It's easier to compartmentalize and to digest.
The thing is, for children, the power...
Which is why religion is such a big... targets kids so easily. That's why a lot of kids tend to digest religion so easily.
Fantasy is a really appropriate form of storytelling. It perfectly mirrors their young lives. On the flip side, telling children that the proper application of power has a lot of nuance and maybe involves consent, that's a message that is a lot harder to relate to. So it makes sense that Korra didn't sit right with a lot of fans of The Last Airbender, but I think it's so cool that the creators of Avatar built up a narrative ideology and then proceeded to deconstruct it. Do I think Korra is a perfect show? No, absolutely not. It's very hard to tell a story with such mature concepts and keep it kid-friendly enough to air on Nickelodeon, which means there are a lot of half measures and pulled punches. The ideas of the show are sometimes at odds with the structure, like a teenager after a growth spurt, whose clothes just don't fit anymore.
Yeah, and this is why we really don't like Korra right here. We really don't like Korra because of that. That's why we really don't like Korra. Let's keep it a buck. All right. We don't like Korra because she went from a white guy or Japanese guy to a white or Japanese lady. And she's a black protagonist. Dog, keep it a buck. Like I'm tired of these people capping and saying like, oh, Korra was just a bad. He's just bad. I'm not racist. I'm not misogynist. Stop the cap, bro. I just want to say that I believe you said you were like 27, and I thought that we could have adult conversations at this age, but I was regrettably wrong, terribly wrong. And I plan to do my own further clarification when this goes live. All right, that's what this is here, right? This stream was more of like an opportunity or a courtesy for your time as a mod or channel mod or just your time in the server, And I guess I determined that you know, you should probably not be quite associated. But if you see this video, cool. You know, I'm gonna try to use this as like the standard going forward. You know, hopefully we could have more thorough conversations when it pertains to things like fiction and anime. Because I really wanted to dive into like um, I don't know. I really wanted to dive into like the last or the any current anime drama. I wanted to dive into like mental health. I wanted to dive into like the top 5 anime reviewers or black anime reviewers that um, you know do a little kick off from uh, Black History Month. Yeah, I guess we won't get into like games or anything today. I wanted to get into other anime, upcoming anime that's coming up, or movies or games that's coming up as well in 2026. But maybe I'll just leave that in another episode of the Sing Zone podcast. Anyways, my name is Zone, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time, travelers. Peace.